Alright, chat, could I get a little bit of an audio sync really quickly? Could you just, clap your hands really quickly? I want to make sure that all of our voices can sync up in the edit later on, okay? Thank you. Much appreciated, much appreciated. You're all really big professionals here, I hope you know that. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is filled with a bunch of strange and interesting cards. Some break the game over its knee with how complicated they are, and some of them are just the dullest thing you've ever read. Today's is kind of in the middle of that one. We have a remix of a classic card that hasn't really had its time to shine yet, but now I want to show off which cards work with it best. Today, we're talking about Greater Polymerization, a normal spell card that fusion summons a fusion monster from your extra deck using 3 or more monsters from your hand or field as fusion material, and if you do, it gains these effects. This card cannot be destroyed by card effects, and if this card attacks a defense position monster, it inflicts piercing battle damage. So the downside is that you can never use this for any monster that only requires 2 material, and if a monster has a variable amount, you do need to make sure you're using at least 3. The upside is that that monster gains a little extra to help protect the investment, but it's not quite useful for all of them. So that's what today's episode is going to be all about. We're going to be ranking every available option for Greater Polymerization and seeing which ones are worth it and which ones are just dog water, just should not ever be considered. The first step in that journey, though, is figuring out which ones we cannot use. There is a large list of monsters that list more than 2 material, but some of them operate under different conditions. I have a list here of all of those monsters from ABC Dragon Buster to XYZ Dragon Cannon. I'm only now just realizing that it's literally an A to Z kind of thing, so very funny. There's some that require, in fact, most of these require contact fusions. The Elemental Hero monsters, Gladiator Beasts, Gate Guardians combined requires some form of contact fusion that doesn't have to be on the field. In general, these require some other way to summon them that ignores using some kind of card like Polymerization, so you can never make it with these ones. So we are just cutting all of these from the list, but everything else is up for grabs today on the Greater Polymerization tier list. Let's get started. So first up on the list is Melodious, the Abyss Dragon, a classic Albaz card. Most of them require only 2 material. This one can use as many dragons as possible. Now, the good thing about Melodious is that it is a multi-attacker. The more materials that go into it, the more attacks it can do on monsters. It can't attack directly with multiple attacks. So actually, the piercing battle damage is pretty helpful on this one. The downside is that we do need that triple material on it, but because it's just the Albaz or its substitutes and things like Bestials, that might not be terrible. So to kind of outline generally where we're going to put things on the tier list, D is going to be something that is just absolutely unplayable with these cards. In fact, we can put Armatael right here because we literally just can't make it with him. If I had put an F here, it would go here. S is going to be just like the perfect card for it. Like, it can benefit from it. The requirements of needing 3 or more isn't going to affect its usage too much. A, B, and C are going to be kind of variables between that. A is going to be like it mostly helps. C is like negligible. B is going to be kind of in the middle. Melodious, I'd almost say out of all of them, this is an S tier option for Greater Polymerization, right? That may be too much, because, the cards themselves already have the perfect way to summon them in the form of branded fusion, and Melodious comes with the super secret I can contact fusion alternate summon requirement, which makes it really good against opposing dragon decks. My heart tells me S, but it is probably more like an A, especially because it's A for Albaz. So we're going to put it in A. I reserve the right to recalibrate that as we go on. Also, before we keep going, Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is on here. We're going to put that in D, and this is going to represent all of the non-effect monsters that have 3 or more material. That's going to be, I've got a list here off the side. It's going to be Aqua Dragon, Blue Eyes Ultimate, Man-Eating Black Shark, and Metal Foes Crimsonite. All of these can be summoned with Greater Polymerization, but there's 2 issues with it. One, they don't bring anything to the table themselves that would make us want to use it. Like, we're not building on anything that helps us out. Number 2, Greater Polymerization does not apply an additional effect to the monster like how the Yang Zings apply things to a monster. It gives the monster those effects. So not only would something like Imperm negate those effects, they're no longer a non-effect monster for the purposes of things that care about non-effects. Now that's a big corner case, but it is a corner case. So those are all being represented by that. They're being in D. Ancient Gear Golem Megaton. Now this one is one of the Ancient Gear Golem monsters that does not inherently have piercing. So it gives us the ability to do that with our multi-attack should we use multiple Ancient Gear Golems or Ancient Gear Golem multiple pounds, ultimate pound. Very sorry. My pound game isn't quite what it used to be. It does have better fusion abilities now, right? Like, we have had Ancient Gear Fusion for a while, which necessitates you having an Ancient Gear Golem available at the start. And there's that new trap card, Ancient Gear Duel, which uses material from your graveyard on top of one that you have on the field. It feels like this one does benefit a lot from the help. Gaining the piercing and the multi-attack is good, but it also has a floating effect, so we're not too concerned about it being destroyed. So I think Megaton is gonna be in like C tier, maybe B tier. We'll keep it in C tier. I think there's things better than that. Multiple what? Multiple pounds, Megacombi. It's a sex joke. Please, keep up. Arcana Knight Joker. You know what? Actually, I changed my mind. Megaton is a B. This one is a C. It comes with a very conditional negate, but that still makes it better than things that we literally cannot summon. But yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Arcana Knight Joker, if an effect targets it, you can pitch a card that matches its type to stop that. Now, with the destruction protection from effects, this is less things you have to worry about negating from the targeting, and it can let you focus on things that target it that don't destroy it, things like Comp Evac. But the negate itself is still pretty bad, and on top of that, we also have the Face Card Knight support that we got a little while ago. Face Card Fusion can summon this out a lot easier than Greater Polymerization, so I think this is a clear example of a C tier card. Armatael, the Chaos Phantasm, Phantom of Fury. So this is an example of one of the cards that we can summon with the effect of Greater Polymerization. That is also going in the D tier, largely because the whole point of summoning it is not to actually use it. The second it's on the field, we ship it off to our opponent, and then it gets banished to summon out the actual Armatael. So this ain't doing nothing for us with Greater Polymerization, and it even has better ways to summon it, so we ain't doing that. Barbaroid. Now, this is going to be interesting. So it does require 5 Roid monsters, so it's very expensive to make. I don't think Roids have a better way to summon this. The only alternative I can think of is the floating effect of Cyber Dragon Nova. Barbaroid also comes with 2 attacks, and it doesn't do piercing, but it does 1,000 damage to the opponent if it runs something over in battle, on top of negating the effects of what it destroys in battle. So this could be good. Barbaroid is a D. Imagine getting 5 Roids on the field. Well, thankfully we don't have to use the field ones. We can use in hand. Mega Kobe's bringing up Power Bond. So the Power Bond itself is like, it's gonna be the same thing regardless, although Barbaroid will become a 10,000 attacker that does 5,000 back to you. The question is though, like, A, is it any better to use Power Bond? And I would argue no, because there's a diminishing returns on attack power. B, we do have Cyberdark Chimera that gives Power Bond the ability to Miracle Fusion, and then that makes Barbaroid. So that lets us make this a lot cheaper with a bunch of Roid monsters in the graveyard. I think, and at the expense of making it a joke, we can put Barbaroid in B. B for Barbaroid. I think that this is one of the better options we can summon off that. It would be funny to summon this in Speedroids. True! B Trooper, Mighty Fusion Hercules Bercules. This card by itself is pretty terrible. It requires 4 B Trooper. It's either 4 B Troopers or 4 insects, but either way, it still requires a lot of it. And their onboard fusion card does not let you cheat the material. It can banish an insect to put itself back in your hand, but you have to use 4 insects for it. So, outside of being a non-archetypal card, Greater Polymerization is basically the same thing as using B Trooper Landing, I think the spell is. That being said, the fusion is unaffected by your opponent's card effects until the end of the next turn, or until the end of the turn that it summons. So it has kind of a Tower's immunity, but it only lasts for so long. The other cool thing about it is that the fusion reborns monsters during the end of every battle phase, I think it is. So you do get value the longer you can keep it on board, so it being protected from card effects even after the initial turn is not terrible, but I'm still putting it in C tier. It still requires 4 monsters, and what it does is just not worth it. Blue Eyes Alternative Ultimate Dragon. So this one requires 3 Blue Eyes. If you have an alternative Blue Eyes White Dragon as a material, it can take its pop effect of a singular card and turn it into 3. The problem is that when you do that, it doesn't attack, which is kind of at odds with using the piercing battle damage, right? So it's hard to justify keeping this around. Also, if I'm not mistaken, this is also already protected by card effect, from effect destruction. Yeah, so it already has protection. So this barely does anything and is actually kind of at odds with what the card wants to do. So this is another C tier. This is just not a great card to summon off Greater Poly. Chaos Ancient Gear Giant. Now, I believe, and I'm double checking this, Chaos Ancient Gear Giant already has piercing, so it doesn't need that. The protection effect technically helps, but it's already unaffected by spell and trap cards, so no torrentials are going to hit this, no dark holes, none of that. Your opponent can't activate monster effects during the battle phase, so if there are monster effects that destroy, making Chaos Ancient Gear Giant off of Greater Polymerization is helpful. And a lot of the things that let you make Chaos Ancient Gear Giant doesn't work with the Ancient Gear fusion cards. The new Ancient Gear Duel requires you to summon monsters that list Ancient Gear Golem in its text, which Chaos Ancient Gear Giant actually does not do. And on top of that, even though we can't use those effects, it is a Dark Machine fusion monster, so its 4 material requirement is handily met by using Overload Fusion. So this is also a C tier. Arguably even a D tier, but it's not useless to summon off of it like some of these cards. This still does get something out of it. Chimera the Illusion Beast is actually pretty funny because this one is a multi-attacker. So this one actually does benefit from being able to punch things, and then it also deals additional damage too. I gotta double check them. This card can attack monsters a number of times each battle phase up to the number of materials used for it. If this card battles a monster, neither can be destroyed by that battle. At the end of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can change that monster's attack to 0. So it doesn't do any burn damage, but if your opponent has a defense position monster, it by itself solos Chimera the Illusion Beast, right? Because it can't destroy the monster in battle, so it can't do any direct attacking. So having the piercing added on there not only means that by using 3 material, you're going to get 3 attacks on there, this does guarantee that you'll be doing damage with all of them. And it gains the protection on it too, so it protects the investment. Now, that being said, the illusions do kind of already have Chimera Fusion, which is a really good way to make this card. I think this is another A tier card for sure. In fact, I'd put it over Alba Lenatus. Like, this is a huge card to add to the collection. Chimera Tech Overdragon. This one is kind of rough, right? When you summon it, you send everything else to the graveyard, so this is going to be the only thing that you have. Overload Fusion has been the primary way of summoning this forever. You get multiple attacks on monsters, you gain a huge amount for every material you use, and by using Overload Fusion, it's not actually a drain on your resources. If you make this with Greater Polymerization, At minimum, it's 2400 that attacks 3 times, but that doesn't clear the 3000 marker, so you need to make a 4th one. And if you're hard making this with that one, that's super unreasonable. Chimera Tech needs too many materials to be good, I think. Yeah, even in the context of Greater Polymerization, I can't justify Overdragon being anything higher than a C, so that's going right there. In fact, let me go ahead and realign some of these here. We can put that there. This one is all right there. There we go. I think that about does it. There we go. However, cybernetic fusion support. Oh, Blitz does bring up a good point. When it comes to the cyber monsters specifically, cybernetic fusion support takes any of our fusion effects and lets us use material from anywhere. So we could actually, with a little bit of life point drain, benefit from using Greater Polymerization while still having the wide reach. And with the added piercing damage, even defense position monsters don't get in our way. So, with that being said, I'm going to bump... It's still C tier, but I'm bumping it up a few slots to account for its combo with cybernetic fusion support. Chimera Tech Rampage Dragon is also kind of in a similar situation, and I would argue that it's almost D tier, right? Because Chimera Tech Rampage Dragon is largely about destroying back row when it's summoned and sending material from deck to graveyard. Having to add an additional material to its summon just makes it harder to summon. That being said, pair it with Seeger, and this does legitimately destroy your opponent. And getting rid of their defense, being able to punch through their defense position monsters for piercing battle damage could help with the boost. But I remain unconvinced that that's going to be one of the primary ways. So this is going to take Chimera Tech Overdragon's old spot, kind of. Well, it's still better than Arcana Knight Joker. So this next one is Coridius, the Triphasic Dealman. One second, we gotta get that name pulled up. Yeah, Coridius, the Triphasic Dealman. So I'm gonna run everyone through this just in case you don't know. It is a level 9 Dark Fiend Fusion monster with 3000 attack and 3000 defense, requiring, get this, a Synchro monster, an Xyz monster, and a Link monster as material. Once while this fusion summon card is face up on the field, you can pay life points in multiples of 2,000 and choose one effect for every 2,000 life points paid. You can only apply each effect once. You resolve them in order, skipping any that were not chosen. Either A, you add a spell or trap card from your graveyard to your hand. B, destroy 3 cards your opponent controls. Or C, this turn, this card gains attack equal to half the difference between your life points and your opponent's. Also, other monsters cannot attack. So if your opponent has 8,000 life points, and you have 8,000 life points, and you summon this, and you pay 6,000 life points, 6,000 to get all of these effects, you now have 2,000, your opponent has 8,000. The difference between you is 6,000, half of that is 3,000. So Coridius, the Triphasic Dealman, will be a 6,000 attack monster that pops 3 and gets a spell or trap card from your grave back to your hand. Now, this is the only monster that can attack this turn. So it's not even going to be able to do lethal, right? Like, unless you have some kind of other attack booster, this isn't going to get us there. And on top of all of that, because it requires a Synchro monster, we actually have a Miracle Fusion made specifically for this. Miracle Synchro Fusion. So we could just shunt a whole bunch of cards to the graveyard, use Miracle Synchro Fusion, and make it that way. Otherwise, we have to hard summon this, and what are we getting? Piercing on it, and it also can't be destroyed by card effects. Really cool. This is, like, the highest of the D tiers, because you're not making this to attack with it. There's some other things it's accomplishing for you. It ain't this. So, very high D tier because you could use it, but the Dealman's getting a D. God, I'm so upset that we keep doing these frickin' alliterations. For all of the movie lovers out here, for all my Dark Side of Dimension fans, next up is Crimson Nova Trinity, the Dark Cubic Lord. So, when it declares an attack, it halves our opponent's life points. So already, we want to be attacking with this. When it destroys a monster by battle, it can do a second attack during that battle phase. So we can potentially do multiple attacks with this. It already has protection from not just effect destruction, but effect targeting. So it's not getting the full bonus, but it is helping us to get through defense position monsters. Also, this is actually better to summon than the on-theme way that cubics have. I believe it's Unification of the Cubic Lords, and that's a trap card. We could just use Greater Polymerization on this. Regular Polymerization can of course be used as well, but this one gives it a little extra piercing to close out the game. And with 4,500 attack, that's a lot of damage you're getting through just in case. So I'm actually pretty confident in putting this as the highest B tier of the whole section so far. It's a really solid card to summon off Greater Polymerization. Also, every attack has your opponent's life points, remember? Yeah, so on top of all of that, you're already putting your opponent in very lethal range. The only downside is that having your opponent's life points will never, unless, not never, but it's a lot more difficult to kill your opponent by having their life points than by being able to get in for an actual good hit. So Greater Polymerization, like, you attack with Cubic, Crimson Nova Trinity, the effect activates on attack declaration, so their life points are halved, and then you punch. And if they're at 8,000, they're going to go to 4,000. If their defense is only 500, you win the game right there. If it's not, then you get a second attack on this. And the second attack from Crimson Nova Trinity does not have to be on a monster. So if they have an empty board, you still just win. Cyber End Dragon already has piercing involved. It just gains the effect destruction protection. We already have way better ways to summon this monster in Cyber Dragons, and if we're doing the Cybernetic Fusion support, we have better options to utilize than this. So Cyber End Dragon is going to go right about here on the usefulness scale. Cyber Eternity Dragon is a little weirder because it has conditional effect destruction protection already added into it if you have another fusion monster in your graveyard. But I would argue that Cyber Eternity Dragon does its best work while in the graveyard, giving other monsters protection so that they can flourish. So it honestly feels like this is going to be a D tier one. I'd almost never want to spend Greater Polymerization summoning this thing over something else. We have something similar in Cyber Dark Dragon. Its only real effect is that it gets big. It equips a dragon. It gains more attack depending on the number of monsters in graveyard. So it can take advantage of the piercing pretty nicely. And protecting it with the effect destruction protection, you know, it's nice, but outside of that, it's not accomplishing anything else. It's not really anchoring our board, and it's still vulnerable to almost any other kind of removal. So this one gets like a low C. We're going to get it right, I think, above Cyber End Dragon. Cyber Darkness Dragon is a bit rougher because it requires 5 material to make, but it actually has a negate attached to it. So it's bigger, and it helps stop our opponent from doing stuff. That being said, we still have a million other better options. We can power bond this with the Chimera tech, the Cyberdark Chimera effect. We have, of course, we have the Overload Fusion. I still think this is a C tier, but it's better than regular Cyberdark Dragon. I would put it right about up here. I mean, it's actually good. Cyber Darkness Dragon, for its bracket, is actually a pretty good card. Especially in the context of its other support, right? Like, you have the Cyberdark Invasion, I think, is the continuous trap card that keeps equipping your Cyberdarks with cards, so you can keep putting negates on it. It gets pretty big. Like, this is actually a pretty stupendous card for its bracket. Does fusion support work on there? It is any machine fusion monster, so it could still do that. I still feel like it needs to be in high C. If you're in, like, Bs, I feel like you need to be good on your own merits. You don't need to have to combo off with something else, so maybe this is just, like, the best C so far. But I think that's about as far as I'm willing to go on that. Clock Wyvern. This one is pretty weird, so let me go ahead and, rather, it's Cyber's Clock Dragon, not Clock Wyvern. That's the material needed for it. Woof. I'm doing good today, folks. It's a level 7 dark 2500 attack Cyber's fusion monster. Requires a Clock Wyvern and any number of link monsters as material. When this card is fusion summoned, you can send cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard equal to the total link rating of the material used for this card's fusion summon. And if you do, until the end of the next turn, after monsters you control, other monsters you control cannot attack. Also, this card gains 1,000 attack for each card sent to the graveyard. So it checks for the link rating. So you are incentivized to use as many link monsters as possible to make this thing heckin' big. The issue is that we do have a better card for this, because I think we have a card that lets us... I think just Cynet Fusion lets us use material in the graveyard, right? That is it. That is it. Okay, Clock Lizard. You contribute this card, return a fusion monster from your graveyard to the extra deck, then fusion summon that fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion material listed on it from your graveyard. Anyway, the point is that we have a card that makes Clock Dragon, really, really big to punch already, and it uses a bunch of material from our graveyards if we have a bunch of link monsters in there. Greater Polymerization would, at minimum, be Clock Wyvern plus 2 link monsters. If they're only 2 link ratings each, that could get up to 6,500, but we can get a lot better with Clock Lizard. So, in a pinch, we can still use Greater Polymerization to protect this against stuff, and, once again, it does get us through defense position monsters so that we're not wasting the effect. I think this can conceivably work, but it's a high C. I can't get it anything more than that. Dangerous Frightfur and Gem-Knight is gonna be pretty low. Arguably, it may even be a D tier card. While we do want it to attack things, all we care about is if it destroys monsters in battle, and the effects given out by Greater Polymerization doesn't actually help with that. Now, Frightfur Fusion does exist, but Frightfur Fusion banishes material from the graveyard, and Dangerous Frightfur and Gem-Knight gains attack for every fairy and fiend in our graveyard, so actually, that's kind of to its detriment. Granted, Frightfurs also have a big polymerization sub-theme there too, so they could just hard make this with the regular polymerization. Greater Polymerization, though, we would have to use that. Polymerization regular would still use 3 material, so this would protect it, and it gives it piercing, while maintaining our monsters in graveyard to keep Nightmare's effect up. So, by dint of using a card that doesn't banish cards in our graveyard, it does kind of help. But you can search regular Polymerization, and Greater Polymerization doesn't really have the same kind of, usage. It also comes with its own negate. When your opponent activates a card or effect that targets this card on the field, you can banish a Frightfur monster from your extra deck to negate the effect. But it only works against... It helps with targeting protection, or targeting negation, which is good, which complements its effect destruction in general, but I still don't think it does a whole lot. I have to agree, this is basically like a low C kind of card. Probably right about here, I think. And it's actually kind of a mid-C, to be honest. Dante. This is already a bad fusion in and of itself. I'm going to get the direct text here. I know off the top of my head it requires 3 Burning Abyss monsters. It does require different names. Gosh, this card is so unfortunate. Everything about this card, like, as a Burning Abyss fan, as a lover who took this card to a regional and actually won a mirror match with this card, it is so painful to see how this card has been used. Takes 3 different Burning Abyss with different names. Has to be fusion summoned. You can't summon it by any other way, so you can't sear it back to the field. It can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects, which is actually complemented by the fact that it cannot be destroyed by card effects with Greater Polymerization. Now, it doesn't super work with the piercing. 2,800 is a nice amount of attack power, and the fusion spell actually gains us a little extra attack power for a turn if we banish it from the graveyard, but aside from that, it's not doing anything more to help us. The on-theme fusion spell is better by dint of the fact that we can send it to the graveyard with Kagna and then recur it with Dante. This card is definitely in the C territory. I would argue it's like hovering around here. I think it's like around here. How can it be bad? It sends the Burning Abyss monsters where you want them. The graveyard. What could possibly go wrong? Hey, Mega Combi, everything! So this is a pretty new one, and I think we have a lot of potential here. Chlorless Chaos King of Darkworld. We need Rainbow Overlord of Darkworld and 2 or more Fiend monsters. When we fusion summon it, we pop all cards our opponent controls. It's a huge board wipe. There's a bunch of other effects on here. It gains attack equal to the number of material used for its summon, so minimum it's at 3,000, but could be more, because it's 2+ Fiend monsters. As a quick effect, it's a discard outlet that makes something untargetable for the rest of the turn. So that part I'm not too concerned with. Now, Rainbow, the Overlord of Dark World, does kind of imply that we're only making this a Dark World. And Dark World does have better options in and of itself. I believe Dark World Accession discards the material, so we can get the effects of our Dark Worlds. And it also banishes from Graveyard, too. Oh, man, I'm losing my mind here. Dark World. Okay, yeah, it banishes material on the field or in the graveyard, and it discards Dark World monsters as material as well. So, in Dark Worlds, Greater Polymerization, terrible. Don't play it. But if you're playing a Fiend deck that also has a Fusion Substitute monster, Blitz is on the same wavelength as me, Greater Polymerization can summon this card, gets you the board wipe, protects this card from destruction, which kind of complements its targeting protection that it can give to itself or something else, gives you a discard outlet, and is just big. Like, it could just be 3,000 at base. I don't think anyone's going to fault you for that. But you could also make it 4,000, make it 5,000 if you want to. You just have to, use actual real material for it. I'm on the fence about this, though, because what are the fusion substitutes that we're using in the decks that run this while also using polymerization, right? Like, we could use Accession to banish the fusion substitute from the graveyard, so we have to actually use a real fusion substitute card. Frightfur is actually an interesting scenario where Accession fusion summons Fiend monsters, so it actually gets to use that card to make its Frightfur monsters, and if we pitch King of the Swamp, that gets to be used as the material in graveyard as the fusion substitute for Rainbow. So, even in that scenario, that very strange scenario, I admit, but even in that scenario, it still kind of works. Muddy Muddragon and Infernities can be that, but like, in that case, it already comes with a fusion effect. So it's adding an extra card on top of it. The more I talk about it, I kind of had high hopes for Chlorless, but now that we're talking about it for real, I kind of got to give it a C tier ranking. I feel like it's about here. C for Chlorless, folks. We're not escaping the allegations. D3S Frog. It requires 3 Death Frogs, is 2,500 attack, and gains 500 attack for each Treeborn Frog in your graveyard. Next monster. Despian Priskenian. It needs a Despia, a light, and a dark. So this is a valid card for it. It gives it protection, so it can keep resolving the effect where we get to steal our opponent's extra deck monsters out of their graveyard. I forget what else it does. One second. When it destroys a monster by battle, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to the monster's original attack or defense. So, it also is incentivized to attack monsters. So we add piercing onto a 3,200 attack body. It's doing something, but as far as Despias go, we already have things like Brandon and Red, which helps to summon this at quick speed and can kind of cheat the material requirements a little bit. I don't know. I'm not super convinced on Priskenian. I think it's probably our new best C-tier monster, but I wouldn't call it a B-tier quite yet. Destiny Hero Dominance. So, this has an attacking effect. If we destroy a monster by battle, we draw a card. When it's summoned, we get to manipulate some top decks. The problem is its floating effect. It needs to have cards in graveyard for it to work. Now, granted, if we use Greater Polymerization, we will have those material in graveyard. But with Fusion Destiny, we're sending that material directly from the deck to the graveyard, so we get to maximize the cards that we get to summon off of Dominance when it blows itself up because of Fusion Destiny's effect. I would argue that this was made specifically to use with Fusion Destiny. So, I would put this is the lowest C tier. It's worse than any of these other options because the way it's being summoned off Greater Polymerization acts counter to the intended, I believe, combo here. But it is still better than anything in D tier. It becomes, with Greater Polymerization, a monster with more protections that gets you piercing damage when you attack into monsters for those free draws. So I still think there's some value to it, even if you really want to be summoning with Fusion Destiny anyway. Dragon Magia Master. We're going to read this one out really quickly because this one's a hoot and a holler. This one was revealed recently, and its material requirement is very funny. So it's either a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon or 3 Blue Eyes monsters, and a Chaos or Black Luster Soldier Ritual monster as material. The relevant stuff. When your opponent activates a card or effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it, and you can use that effect once per turn for every card type between monster, spell, or trap card. So it's got 3 potential negates every turn. If this face-up card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can float into a Blue Eyes or Chaos or Black Luster Soldier Ritual monster from your extra deck or graveyard. So, this card doesn't have any inherent protection to it, and is a negate, so it can protect itself against anything that isn't effect, destruction, or protection. If it is destroyed, it gets to float into some pretty powerful monsters. The problem here is that it does have a minimum requirement of 2, an Ultimate Dragon and a Chaos or Black Luster Soldier Ritual monster. But if you substitute the Ultimate Dragon for 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, now its minimum material cost is 4. It's good, but it's not Greater Polymerization good. So this is definitely a C tier. But like, oh man, no, it might actually be a D. It might actually be a D tier. Are we putting it in D tier for Dragon Magia Master? I think I'm putting it in D tier. I think it's the best D tier we have out of all of them because it's the most powerful. But Lord, is it tough to make with it? It's not even worth it. So our next 2 are the dual avatar monsters, Empowered Kongyo and Empowered Mitsujaku. So I'm already not a fan of dual avatars as they are. The dual avatar's primary fusion effect too, or their primary card they use to make material for fusion summons, also gives you fusion summons, so it's not like we need more fusion effects for it. Mitsujaku, if you control 2 more fusion monsters, you can destroy a monster on the field of monster effects and negate it, so it has some removal. It keeps our dual avatar fusions from being destroyed by battle once per turn each, and it bounces cards. The destruction protection pairs with the battle destruction pretty well, but you know, it's just not like, it's not going to do anything else. Especially with 2,000 attack, it's not going anywhere. This is kind of with dominance here because making it with Greater Polymerization is just actively worse than making it with the onboard fusion effects. Kongyo, though, if I remember correctly, I was looking at it, and I think this actually has some merit to it. It has an Armades effect. If it attacks, it returns a monster to the opponent's hand. When your opponent's spell or trap card or effect is activated that targets this card in the field, you can negate the activation while you control 2 or more fusion monsters. Actually, no, yeah. It attacking, like, bounces cards, and the Armades means the attack will go through. Its 3,000 attack benefits from the piercing better, but it's still, like, with Mitsujaku. It's just not, it ain't doing much. Okay, Elemental Hero Core is a funny one. We get to double our attack when it's attacked once per turn. And then if it battles, it gets to pop a card on the field. Now, this is a battles trigger, not a on-attack trigger. Like, not when it's attacking. It has to actually fight something. So we do get the opportunity to pierce through something with it, and then we get to pop something afterwards. So we can, like, pierce through a weaker monster and then deal with a big monster so we can keep the damage going through. 2 problems with this. 1, this is an elemental hero monster, so we have access to Miracle Fusion, so we can make this much easier and cheaper. And B, it does come with a really good floating effect on top of it, so it being destroyed is not the worst. So this is kind of a low C. Well, the more I look at it, the better this is some of these ones. It'll go right up here. Right up there for things that are bad to make with Greater Polymerization. One of them is Core. Divine Neos. Now, like with Core, this also, I think, can be made with Miracle Fusion. I'm going to double check Divine Neos really quickly to make sure I'm not. So as an elemental hero, we can banish all these material from the graveyard to summon this card. Because it's so expensive, I feel like we have to use Miracle Fusion for this or nothing. That being said, I don't think any of the monsters you banish with this card give it any protection. So with Greater Polymerization, we get to push through with the damage we're getting off of its effect activation, and we get to ensure that it's safe against removal, because if you sink in, even if you use Miracle Fusion with this, you're banishing 5 cards. You are shredding almost your entire graveyard to make this card. But you are using a total of 6 real cards to make this with Greater Polymerization. So this is definitely, like, down here with the cards that it's actively worse to not use Miracle Fusion. Elemental Hero Electrum. This one is actively going in D tier right out of the gate, right down here with Armatael, Phantom of Chaos. The whole point of summoning Electrum is to recycle your banished cards, which means that you're using it with Miracle Fusion. So there is like no other reason to summon this outside of making it with Miracle Fusion. So this is a D-list card. Elemental Hero Tempest. This is another 3 material one. I forget. It's like Bubbleman, Avion, and something else. It might be Sparkman. It does have an interesting effect where you can send a card to graveyard, designate a card. While this is on the field, those monsters can't be destroyed by battle. So giving this effect destruction protection complements that effect, but it's still pretty bad because you have to use all 3 of those normal monsters, and we have way, way better options to use our fusion effects on. This is a real bad. This is like a down here kind of bad. The Phantom Exodia Incarnate. Einsig is already on it. If you have the 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand ready to summon with this, you've already won the game. This is actually, like, legitimately the worst target because there are scenarios where you have Forbidden Ones on your field and you fuse those off. But if you have all 5 pieces ready to go and they're between your hand or field, you've got to find a way to put it into your hand. Like, the way you normally make it is by playing Millennium Cross and revealing those pieces. This is just like the worst card to summon off of all of them, like for real. Even non-effect monsters, you can play them. This one just spits in the face of, like, the mechanics of the game, so no, that one is just low as D tier. Moki Moki King is so high on S tier that it wraps back around to being D tier. Hey, hold on a sec, we're not even there yet. X-Tox Hydra is a wild one, so it requires 2+ monsters special summon from the extra deck. It draws you cards equal to the amount of battle damage that it deals for every 1,000 damage that it does. And if it fights a monster whose card type matches what was used as its material, you reduce the attack of that monster to 0. So if you use a fusion monster for it, it's now at 0. You get to draw 2 cards because you deal 2,000 damage through it. This requires you to use 3, I don't know if it needs to be different, but 3 extra deck summon monsters as material for this summon, and it protects it from being destroyed, and it deals piercing. So X-Tox Hydra, on the surface, is one of the best cards that we could possibly summon using this card, but Lord, is the material requirements on this something to be beheld. What am I supposed to... This is like Corodius, the Triphasic Dealman, except in that regard, that can at least use Miracle Synchro Fusion. X-Tox Hydra has to be monsters special summoned from the extra deck, and guess what monsters in the graveyard count as? Have a quick guess, time's up already. It doesn't! That being said, it does still technically benefit from everything that Greater Polymerization has to offer, so while it's not high on the list, it is still better than anything that D tier has to offer us. I would put it somewhere around... oh god, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, it's better than that, it's better than that. It can go right here. X-Tox Hydra goes right here. 5-headed dragon. Dragon's Mirror already exists. D tier. Next question. This is actually an interesting segment. This is all of the Frightfur monsters. Now, for Chimera and Sabertooth, I'm actually kind of going to go really quickly and say that Sabertooth is very low C tier, because if you use 3 material for it, it's already protected by effect destruction. So it only gains the piercing battle damage. It's kind of in this vein over here. Frightfur Chimera steals the things that it destroys in battle, so we do want to still be attacking. But otherwise, the effect is kind of lame, and I never use it anyway. It's kind of like up here. It's just below Sabertooth. In fact, looking at Joker, there's no way it's not worse than Joker, so it's actually going to go up here. That being said, Frightfur Tiger does get a ton of attack points, and we don't necessarily want to well, no, that's not true. We do want to use a lot of material for its summon because it pops a whole bunch of cards. So we're going to put it in high C tier because its effect on the board also gives our Frightfurs a ton of attack power. So it being able to survive stuff is kind of huge. So I'm putting it in high C tier. But I'm actually gonna say that Frightfur Wolf is almost B tier. Now, of course, Frightfur Fusion exists, and Frightfur Fusion is an excellent card to use with Frightfur Wolf and Frightfur Tiger. I'm not denying either of those, but if you're in a situation where you need to punch for a lot of damage and your opponent has a bunch of defense position monsters, Frightfur Wolf with Greater Polymerization is now protected and gets to punch through all of that stuff. And if we have a card like Frightfur Fusion, now we have a bunch of material in the graveyard that we can spend with Frightfur Fusion. Arguably, what we can do is have Tiger blow up a bunch of back row, and then have Wolf clean up the monsters. Granted, if Tiger deals with the monsters and they don't have any back row to deal with, then yeah, we could have just used regular polymerization for it, but one of them had to eat the Frightfur Fusion at some point, so if one of them had to use Greater Poly, it might as well be the one that we want to put as many material into as possible. Anyway, that we were already doing with things like polymerization to get that maximum attack, so I would actually argue that it is a B tier target for that. Alright, the Gem-Knights, Brilliant Diamond and Master Diamond and Lady Brilliant Diamond. These are arguably in like the same area as Phantom of Fury. These cards, we are not making them to fight. We are not making them to stick around. We are literally making this to enable an FTK, which is about as little interaction with our opponent as possible. These are about as D tier as it gets. I think maybe they're a bit better than Phantom of Fury, to be honest, because they can still be used for battle. I mean, Master Diamond can get pretty big, but if you've played modern Gem-Knights, you know that you're not doing that. And you also have Gem-Knight Fusion regardless, so none of that. Gold Pride Pin Baller. This is also probably a D tier card. The way Pin Baller is summoned is normally during our opponent's turn to scoop their monsters away as a way to stop them from doing any summons against you, or during your own turn to clear out monsters, in which case piercing battle damage isn't really doing anything, so this is going to be another D tier card. Greater Polymerization just is not at all helping with what Pinballer wants to do. He do be ballin' though. He is ballin'. I will not take that away from him. Guardian Chimera is kind of a funny situation here. So, when summoned by a spell effect, you have to use material, or in general, you always have to use material from your hand or graveyard. It has to use 3 anyway, so Polymerization and Greater Polymerization, they're going to use the same amount of material. If you have Polymerization in Graveyard, Guardian Chimera can't be targeted. Greater Polymerization, using that, means that it can't be destroyed by card effects at all, and it gives its 3300 attack body some piercing. Now, this means if you use Polymerization on a different monster and it's already on the graveyard, Chimera already gets both. But kind of like with some of our D tier cards, the only reason you're summoning Chimera, or rather the primary reason you're summoning it, is for the draws and the destructions. The purpose of it is not to punch cards, but it still kind of does. Like, it still kind of helps you push through stuff. So it's a low C card, kind of round about here. It still has some value as a monster to summon off of it, but I'd rather just use regular Polymerization. Infernoid Tiara. So this is going to be another D tier card. If you are using this, you are using it because you have Void Imagination and you want to send a whole bunch of Infernoid monsters from deck to graveyard. You do not actually want to hard summon this card. I know you don't. It's not what it's here for. You want all the other additional effects that come with summoning it off of that. So that's a D tier card. Lunalight cards. We got to pull these up really quickly. So first we have Leo Dancer, and that does require 3 material. Your opponent can't target this card with card effects. Also, it can't be destroyed by card effects. So it's not benefiting from the effect destruction protection. They make a second attack during each battle phase, which kind of worked with the piercing. If your opponent has a bunch of defense position monsters, this would get past them, and 3500 is a great attack stat for it. But if this card attacks a monster, you can destroy all special summoned monsters your opponent controls, which means that the only other attack it would make that might deal piercing is a normal set monster, which doesn't seem likely. If anything, what I'm going to do is attack that monster that isn't going to be affected by the board wipe, pop everything else, and then attack directly again because the attacks are not restricted. So Leo Dancer is definitely one of these low C monsters, especially because Lunalights already have their own Miracle Fusion. So it's not like they can't just do an easy summon. I just kind of placed that without thinking about it. Where would Leo Dancer go on here? It just feels so like... I wouldn't say it's at odds with how it's supposed to be fusion summoned, like how these really low tier, low C monsters are. But it doesn't really benefit very much from it. I think I would argue it's in like right next to Cyber and Dragon. I would call it a worse card to summon because it's a better monster. Lunalight Saber Dancer isn't much different. Your opponent can't target this with card effects, but it is otherwise vulnerable to effect destruction, unlike Leo Dancer. So Greater Polymerization fixes this one, but it's got a graveyard effect, so we actually don't even want to summon this half the time anyway. Its only other effect is that it gains 200 attack for each banished Beast Warrior monster in your graveyard. So if you Miracle Fusion this one, this can gain extra attack power based on what we banish for its summon. So in that regard, actually making this with Greater Polymerization and not using Lunalight Wolf, this is one of the cards that is actually detracted by being made with Greater Polymerization. So this one is going right over here. Okay, so Bloom Prima, the Melodious Choir. We have some Melodious cards here. I'm honestly pretty happy about that one. So it gains 300 for each material used for its summon. Now, it can minimum use 2, a Maestra and a Melodious. That would give it 600 boost, so it'd be at 25. If we get to the third material with Greater Polymerization, it goes up to 28. It can make a second attack unrestricted during the battle phase, so it's got a great attacking potential. And it does float. It gets a card back into your hand, which isn't the greatest floating effect, so I'd be okay with giving it some protection to stick around so it can keep punching stuff. Let me check Ostinato, the Melodious fusion spell, really quickly. Okay, so Ostinato only uses 2 material. Now, granted, it does use any 2 material from the hand or deck, so it can get the Maestra. We don't have to get a Maestra on hand to use Bloom Prima with Greater Polymerization, but once we have it, and we have more of them now than we have in the past because of the new support, this card becomes a pretty fearsome fighter, and if we want to sink more material into it, we can. So Bloom Prima, I actually kind of want to put it at low B tier. Like, this hits a lot of what we want. It's obviously not great, right? Like, the material needs a Maestra, and very few of our monsters are Maestras. I think this is a pretty good monster to summon off. Flowering Etoile is definitely worse. It requires a minimum 3, so when it comes to our fusions, we can't make this with Ostinato. We have to use some of our older effects with this. It inherently temporarily banishes our Melodiouses, and if we temp banish Etoile, that's like it loses the bonus it gets from Greater Polymerization. So I find it hard to justify putting this in anything but D tier. It feels like we have to, like, it feels like it's counter to the idea of the card. That brings us to Moki King. It requires 3 Moki Mokis. If it leaves the field, we summon 3 Moki Mokis. Look, if this was a haha funny, I would put it here. In fact, this is my gift to you. If you want to take a screenshot right now, let me, there we go. There's your screenshot of me being being just floored by the fact that Moki King is at S tier, but unfortunately, this is one of our S tiers. It is meant to be summoned only to be destroyed. Let's put Arcanite Joker in C tier. What makes you think that Arcanite is better than C tier? This one is Mutant Ultimus, takes 3 level 8 or higher mutant monsters. This is one of those where it's pretty difficult to get the material out for it. It can't just be any 3 mutant monsters. It has to be the big evolved ones. And because we have Mutant Cry and Mutant Fusion, we have plenty of other cards that can be used to get this card mobilized. So it's not like Ultimus is like at odds with Greater Polymerization, like how a card like Tierra would be, but it's like, it's not really doing it for us, I don't think. This has to be a C tier card, but it's not a very high C tier card on this one. Especially because, well, no, it has an Omni Negate on there. What I'm thinking is the 2 fusion that has conditional towers effects against certain cards. This one is actually better in that regard because the effect Destruction Protection can let it use its negation more often. I think it's about here-ish. About here-ish. It's pretty good, but I wouldn't be super stoked to play with all the better options. Neo Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. So this one gains multiple attacks, right? At the end of the damage step, if this is the only face-up card you control and this fusion summoned card attacked, send a Blue Eyes Fusion. This card can attack again in a row. You can use the effect up to twice per turn. During either player's turn, when a card or effect that targets a Blue Eyes monster you control is activated, you can banish this card from your graveyard to negate the activation. So this itself doesn't have targeting protection. It gives it to other monsters. So it can't complement the effect Destruction Protection from Greater Polymerization, but it does get it. And it's a multi-attacker, which means its piercing effect gets more value because it attacks more often. If you're playing Blue Eyes, I mean, you could, of course, make this with with Ultimate Fusion because it does list Blue Eyes White Dragon. So there is a better alternative, but if you are hard fusing for this might actually be one of our A tier cards. Like, it might just be that good for it. Oh boy, the Zarks. I put the other Zark in here too, right? Yeah, I put the other Zark in here. Okay, really quickly, D tier for Ray Dragon, because we could make this with Greater Polymerization, but we can't also just summon it by sending regular Zark to graveyard, so that's like, no. So this is kind of a D tier. And then we'll just take care of Zark right here. If we properly fusion summon this with Greater Polymerization, we're already blowing up our opponent's board. And Zark already has effect Destruction Protection as it is. So this is one of those things where it runs counter to the card itself. So this is also a D tier summon off of Greater Polymerization. I'm gonna put my usual issues with Ojamas aside right now. Technically, I think you're correct. Ojama King, depending on how you have your board set up, is either a great defensive body or a great offensive one if you have the country up. If you make it with Greater Polymerization, it now has additional effect protection, which is very helpful because by locking out 3 of your opponent's zones, you have effectively disrupted a lot of your opponent's strategies, especially if it requires them to have more than 2 monsters on the board at any given time. Now, it does require specifically the 3 Ojama monsters, green, black, and yellow, but it's not like we can't easily assemble those because of Ojama magic. So it's not like we're scrounging around for the right material. Technically, Knight is easier to make because it can use any of the Ojamas, but we're not hard up for getting the original trio. The piercing, I mean, you have to deal damage eventually, right? Heck, you're giving your opponent tokens in defense position, which are used to stop you from using all that attack power to one-shot your opponent. But with the piercing from Greater Polymerization, you get to punch through those. So, Ojama King, I think, for all of that, is going to be mid-B tier. If Ojama King did not rely on country to keep its attack stat up, I think it might be better in that regard. But if your opponent hits the country and now you have a 0 attack monster, now they can just punch over it and the zone lock is gone and you're out of there. But I do agree that in the context of what Greater Polymerization gives to the monster, I actually think it's a great fit, so we're putting that on there. Alright, Phantasm Emperor Trilogig requires 3 level 10 monsters. If it's special summoned, or if another monster is special summoned from the graveyard to your field while you control this monster, target a phase-up monster your opponent controls and burn your opponent for damage equal to half its original attack. It's a 4,000 attack monster, so the piercing is nice, but it doesn't have a multi-attack to really take advantage of it. It is doing burn damage on summons, so the piercing helps to keep that damage going through so you can make sure that you destroy your opponent. But 3 level 10 monsters, I can't think of any deck that wants to run this. There is technically the fact that you can play this in Sacred Beasts, because they have one of those not Miracle Fusion. It's not even branded Fusion, I don't think. I think you have to have all the material on hand to make the Fusion monster. But if you have one of them on board, you can keep the effect from being negated or interacted with. But, you know, if you're gonna punish your opponent, you might as well use those 3 level 10 monsters, being the Sacred Beasts, to make Phantom of Fury to get the Armatael to one-punch man your opponent. Going through the effort of making Phantasm Emperor Trilogig just feels ugh. Now, Kudan brings up a good point. You can summon it in trains, because I mean, level 10 trains is the name of the whole thing, right? But, you know, they lock us out of fusions half the time. A lot of their cards are like, you can only use Xyz monsters for the rest of the turn. You can only attack with Xyz monsters. It kind of feels like Trilogig, this is not part of any of their game plans. Trilogig just feels like, I wouldn't say any way to fuse it goes against its thesis statement, but it certainly doesn't feel good to make. Let's give it somewhere about here. I think Trilogig goes about here in the C tier ranking. Prank Kids Battle Butler. This is another one of those that it is antithetical to the deck if you don't use Pandemonium. You want to be summoning this at quick speed. You want to surprise your opponent with this. Now, Greater Polymerization does keep it safe from battle destruction, so this does mean that you can summon it and your opponent can't just blast this before you get to use your Raigeki effect, but the whole point is to surprise your opponent with it. I strongly agree that that's the case. So this is like one of those higher end, it's not like the worst thing to summon it off of Greater Polymerization, but we're probably just going to use Pandemonium on it anyway, especially because we're going to lose it half the time. So the piercing isn't going to really do much for us. Predaplant Tri-Fi Overatum requires any 3 dark monsters on the field. Now, this has been used as a Hail Mary super polymerization target in the past. Kind of like how Starving Venom Fusion was used to just take out 2, Tri-Fi Overatum uses 3. Now, because of the card itself, we need to have the material on the board, but that's not a factor for Greater Polymerization itself. We would have to do that for any fusion effect that we make with this one. The first effect requires Predator counters to use the effect for. I'm going to ignore that here for now. We'll probably circle back to that. but in the context of general dark monster decks. If your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck while you control this fusion summon card, negate the summon and destroy it. So it is inherent summons from the extra deck, negate and destroy. That's a great effect. Stops links, stops synchros, stops exceeds. Sometimes even fusions if there are contact fusions. So this gives us a wide variety of stuff we can use. That's about all it does by itself, though. Is that worth it to play a Polymerization in a deck that has a bunch of dark monsters to access this and give it effect destruction protection? Kind of. It also stops pens from the extra deck. That is true. It also stops pendulum summoning from the extra deck too. So there's that. Kind of. 3,000 is a great big body, so being destroyed by battle is not going to happen very often. The effect destruction protection, especially if we're not on a deck that runs predator counters, means that this is going to protect us in that way preventatively instead of this coming back later. And even if it does revive itself, it's not fusion summoned, so it doesn't get that effect back. The piercing also helps it to put damage through, so in a general dark deck, I'm not entirely sure. But if we are playing a Predaplant deck, this kind of changes a lot here. Because now, Trifio Veritum is potentially 3,000 plus, which means it takes a lot better advantage of the piercing damage that it's doing. And that's really about it. The fact that it revives itself wouldn't matter regardless if Greater Polymerization was used, because then it would lose all of its effects. So it's only slightly better in actual Predaplants. Reminder that Predaplant can search GP with Darlingtonia Cobra. Now that is true. We can search it out because Darlingtonia Cobra searches for Polymerization cards. So Trifio Veritum is a high C. It's just barely not good enough for B, I would say. But it's a very strong C contender. Oh, what the heck? I'll put it in low B. I'll put it in low B. We have enough C's in there. We should give it the push it deserves. Quintet Magician. This card is already protected from effect destruction. Requires 5 spellcaster monsters, and we need 5 differently named ones to get the board wipe effect. This is kind of like in D territory. We want to be summoning this with Magicalized Fusion, which is basically the Dragon's Mirror of spellcasters. This one, I would put it about here. That way we can get the full usage out of it. Otherwise, we are hard fusing a monster that requires 5 materials. Rainbow Overdragon is interesting. So it must be either fusion summoned regularly or special summoned by tributing a level 10 ultimate crystal monster. So you can either fuse together 7 crystal beasts or trade in 1 level 10 ultimate crystal, which is like the Rainbow Dragon and stuff. Which, you know, you need to have 7 crystal beasts anyway, but Rainbow Dragon can check for cards that are in your graveyard or your spell and trap zone. The fusion does not. If can banish a crystal beast from your graveyard to give it an attack boost, so that means that the piercing gets really good, but as a quick effect, you're attributing it to shuffle it off, so it's really not meant to stay on the board at all. And then, yeah, if we weren't doing 5 material for Quintet Magician, we sure as hell are not going to be doing it with this one. Which is, like, unfortunate, because the only card that fusion summons over Dragon that isn't going to break your back over it is, like, Ultimate Crystal Magic or something. Which is, like, a trap card, which isn't very fun. But if we use regular fusion effects, there's no way we're actually making this. And if we cheated into play with the using a Rainbow Dragon, it's not going to get that quick effect, shuffle every card on the field into the deck effect. So this is going to be about right next to Quintet Magician for just how not at all we're using this. Starving Venomy Lethal Dose Dragon is a fusion pendulum monster that requires 3 dark pendulum monsters as material, which, funnily enough, Triantis helps with because it and Bufolicula are dark pendulum monsters, so those kind of help put that together. As a monster, which is really the only thing we care about, each time a card is sent from the field to the graveyard, place a Venomy counter on this card for each card sent. All monsters on the field, except Dark Dragons, lose 200 attack for each Venomy counter on this card. Once per turn, during your main phase, you can negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls until the end of the turn. So it's a skill drain on your turn only for your opponent. Its attack stat doesn't grow, it just decreases other cards' attack stats. And it actually actively hurts you if you are not on a Dark Dragon deck, because it hits all monsters on the field except Dark Dragons, not just your opponents. So it's difficult to tech this into other decks. I see Abyss Actor from Blitz. Get ready for all of your Dark Fiends to have their attack lowered. Even in Predaplant, those are Dark Plant monsters. Get ready for their attacks to be lowered. This just feels... this is a C tier pick, I'm gonna be honest. It's not gonna be awful if we summon it with Greater Polymerization, but for what it gives us, I feel like any other regular fusion effect would be nice. Let's go ahead and put it somewhere around, I think around here. It's a nice C tier card. We have our Vehicroids. Both Jumbo Drill and Stealth Union require 3 and 4 materials respectively, and neither of them have effects that keep them immune from effect destruction. The problem is that there already exists a really good card here, and Blitz is already 2 steps ahead. It's Vehicroid Connection Zone. That also gives them that protection. I believe it also gives them targeting protection. Cannot be destroyed by card effects. Also, its effects cannot be negated, so it also keeps your opponent from hitting them with Imperm, hitting them with Skill Drain, and if you're playing Roids, you need all of your own effects as much as possible, so this is one of those things where it is just actively worse to summon this. Heck, even Jumbo Drill already does piercing battle damage, and Stealth Union halves its attack when it attacks. So these are another in a long line of just terrible to summon off of Greater Polymer. It's actively a travesty to summon off of that. Vehicroid Connection Zone is such a goofy card. I feel like if they can't give Vehicroids good fusion cards, because if you make them with Vehicroid Connection Zone, we're doomed. We're just doomed. Does it make Barbaroid? Yeah. So, you know what's funny about Vehicroid Connection Zone? It makes Vehicroids, not Roid fusion monsters, which means Barbaroid cannot be summoned, and also Steam Gyroid. So even within Cyrus's own cards, his own signature fusion spell cannot be used to summon all of them. Isn't that funny? Isn't that so funny? Kaleido Heart. This one is also kind of a D tier card to fusion summon off of this, because we actually want to be sending it to the grave with our own effects as much as humanly possible, so we can keep milling cards out of our deck with its own self-revival effect. And also, you know, it's Tearlaments. The whole point is that we get to summon it for free off of our mills, so this is about one of the worst cards we can summon off of Greater Polymerization. The first Dark Lord. Your opponent cannot target fairy monsters you control with card effects. That's pretty good, because it doesn't have the effect that keeps it safe from effect destruction in general, so that, once again, those complement each other. There's also something about how if it fusion summoned, you can pop the board if you use Morningstar, and you can pay 1,000 life points to summon a fairy from your hand or graveyard defense position every turn. But that's whatever, it's fine. It also has 4,000 attack, which is a great stat to have if you have piercing battle damage. So, in a deck whose only real fusion effect is a trap card that half the time isn't even really that good, I have to say that the first Dark Lord is like kind of in the high B's. I would say like right here. Greater Polymerization means that it's only vulnerable to non-targeting, non-destruction removal. It has a great body for piercing damage, and because of that, you get to use its effect to revive your fairies every turn more often. This seems like a really good pick to me. Thunder Dragon Titan. This one is kind of goofy. So Thunder Dragon Titan requires 3 Thunder Dragon monsters, I believe, but it has its own alternate summoning condition, which makes it very easy to summon. The protection effect on it doesn't do anything, because if it would be destroyed by a card effect, you can already banish cards from your graveyard. The piercing isn't bad, because we also get the boost from several other cards like Thunder Dragon Core, but we also have Thunder Dragon Fusion, which recycles our cards to make this just in case. So Thunder Dragon Titan is God, it's very low C, if not D tier. In fact, I think it kind of is D tier, honestly. It's pretty high up here. It's just like, it's not like an optimal choice. It's actively unoptimal to use it, so I think it's right there. Trishula, the Icy Dragon of Imprisonment. This is an interesting card to have, because it takes any 3 monsters that you control, and we can banish them to summon this, but it doesn't do anything unless those monsters are dragons. We generally see this being used in decks that want to banish their own cards, or don't mind it, or it's part of their game plan. And then once we do that, we get to banish some other interesting cards. Like we get to, like, banish 1 card from our deck, the top card of our opponent's deck, and a card from their... let me double check the effect here. Yeah, 1 from our deck, 1 from the top of our opponent's deck, and 1 from their extra deck. So we get to shred our opponent's extra deck with this. And we're left with a level 9 monster, which is pretty funny. 3 dragon monsters. Now, the material is just 3 monsters with different names. But you can only use material from your hand and or field. So, Greater Polymerization can make this, but A, its attack stat is pretty middling when it comes to taking advantage of the piercing. And really, it's kind of like Electrum. We are making this specifically for its summon effect, and then we don't care about it. We don't care about it being protected by stuff. And it having piercing doesn't mean much either, so this is also a D tier card. Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem. This is a monster that already has piercing. I believe it has 4,400 attack, but requires an Ancient Gear Golem and 2 Ancient Gear monsters as material. Giving it effect protection is nice because while it does float, it only floats into regular Ancient Gear Golem. But I think we have to put this next to our other Ancient Gear monster for all of this. Where else did we have it? I know we had another one in here. Megaton Golem actually made it to B tier, but that one gets multi-attacking. It didn't have piercing. So actually, no, it's not in B tier. This goes in C tier because it's just not worth it. It's not actively bad to summon it with Greater Polymerization. Having a big monster that can't be destroyed by card effects is pretty good. But yeah, it goes as Ancient Gear Giant. That's what I meant. That's what I was thinking of. It goes right up next to here. All right, Valance Mamanaka. There's no way I am hard fusing the Valance Fusion monster in a deck that is already made up of like a million different moving components. I cannot add this in. I think we got to put it in like a low C, if anything. It's like right here. Mega Combi is getting ahead of schedule on this one, but I think they're right. As a Vision hero, we can't use Miracle Fusion, so we can't cheat this out. We are just about always using some kind of way to hard fuse for it. So normally it's Polymerization. And as a triple attacking 5,000 attack monster, you know, that's nifty. But what happens when you destroy all your opponent's monsters? They can't attack directly. What if they're in defense position? You've kind of lost the chance to do a gigantic amount of damage. Vision Hero Trinity gains piercing when you make it off of Greater Polymerization, is still a triple attacker, and because it has the effect Destruction Protection, there's less things that can stop it from doing that. So, and I feel like it's the only one out of all of these that could possibly be, Vision Hero Trinity is an S tier monster when it comes to using Greater Polymerization. We need more cards like this if we want this card to take off. Wake Up Your Elemental Hero is D tier because it is an Elemental Hero monster and is pretty similar, but we're using Miracle Fusion because it actually uses material in Graveyard that we've built up over the course of a game and doesn't use a million material that we don't like. So let's go ahead and put it up here. It goes up right there. There we go. World Legacy Guard Dragon Almarduke does have a multi-attack. The problem is that its materials are any 3 link monsters. You can attack all monsters. Takes 3 link material. It can auto-destroy link monsters if we have a monster with the same link rating in our graveyard. We can banish it to use the effect. And then it deals burn damage, but that's not really like super relevant to Greater Polymerization at all. Almarduke has an alternate summoning where you can just tribute the link monsters that you have. So if you have those monsters, because they can't be in your hand, they're link monsters, so they're already going to be on the field. If you have 3 of them, you can just tribute them to special summon Almarduke. And if they're in your graveyard, you have Dragon's Mirror because it's a dragon monster. So it's gotta be like... It does give Almerduke some protection. So it's not like it doesn't do nothing. And the multi-attack does mean that its 3,000 attack can be used to inflict some pretty severe damage. I think it's kind of like next to Neo, Blue Eyes White Dragon, where it's just kind of like, yeah, you can make it with Greater Polymerization, but you should probably not. The effect destruction... Well, Neo already can't be affected by that. That was a different reason that was here, actually. Might actually be lower. I think it'll be right here. Right there. Worm Zero, heck yeah, it's funky lore card time. Oh, it's funky lore card time. Worms don't have a fusion effect at all. You have to use polymerization for them. It used to be that you would use future fusion to dump all the material into the graveyard to fill up your grave for other stuff. But now you're not doing it for that one. If Future Fusion was still around, this would be an easy D tier pick, if only for the fact that the monster itself is not what's important. Venting all those cards to the graveyard is, but that's not really the case here. So how else do we use Zero? We're already using, like, polymerization. But if we're making this, we want to be using as many materials as possible. So Greater Polymerization gives Worm Zero some level of survivability, and if you use a lot of material, its attack power gets big, and then it does piercing damage. Doesn't care about the piercing because it's going to wipe the board. Fair. Okay, so it's... At that point, yeah, probably doesn't need the piercing because it's going to be getting rid of a bunch of cards. The effect Destruction Protection, though, that's still pretty nice. And there is not a generic fusion spell for reptile monsters that can, like, use material from other places. Unless we use a generic one, like chain material or some nonsense. And if that's the case, it would blow itself up, so it wouldn't be able to use its effects for very often. So Worm kind of wants to use a fusion spell that gives Zero a little extra protection, even if the piercing doesn't come up very often. Yeah, this is about as close to a C tier card on this list as possible. It's about here, right? I think it's about here. Lastly, Yubel, the Loving Defender Forever. This card's material requirements are a Yubel monster and then any other amount of monsters in a deck that has Super Polymerization as its specific disposal. We have like 3 different ones. And it has 0 attack, like Einzig said. So the piercing means nothing. And it also has effect destruction protection on board. There is literally nothing that Greater Polymerization can give this card that it doesn't already have or need, and it's just better to use with Super Polymerization. So this is a D tier card. The point is to summon it, and technically to attack with it. You do want to run into stuff to do damage, but it's not like it needs the piercing to do it. So it is a D tier for that section. And that's kind of the first draft of our Greater Polymerization tier list. Really quickly, I want to hand it over to the audience. Anything here that stands out? Anything here that seems egregiously off base that we've got to mess with? DS Frog should be higher because this isn't about relative power and Greater Poly is really good for it. Okay, so, well, I mean, I would argue it is about relative. I'm trying to be funny, but I'm trying to actually figure out where it would stand. So D3S Frog has 2,500 attack. Like, I'm going to reread its stats really quickly. D3S Frog. So 3 Des Frogs. The fusion summon of this card can only be conducted with the above fusion materials, but a lot of the things that are Des Frogs say that they're Des Frogs, so that gets around that. This card gains 500 attack for each Treeborn Frog in your graveyard. So at maximum, this card gets to be 4,000. But that's really what this card's effect is, being a big monster, if we put in the extra work for it. Otherwise, it's a 2,500 vanilla. It's like it's playable, but if you're playing it, you want to use Greater Polymerization, right? You're right. It sits right there. Right above all the cards where it's actively worse to use it with other things. Just above that. Okay, you're right. Your argument is sound. I think Saber Dancer should be higher because it seems perfect for Greater Polymerization. So the targeting protection on it does complement the effect destruction, but Saber Dancer was built in a way that just, like, it doesn't want to be summoned. And even if you do, you want to summon it off of Wolf so it gets the bonus off of having banished Beast Warrior monsters. So it is one of those where it's actively worse to make it with a regular fusion effect than to not, if you even make it at all. You're going to send it with Chick or Lunalight Fusion anyway. Yeah, so like largely you're not even going to be summoning this at all. But if you are, you want to use Wolf because it's easier and you get more bonuses out of it. Chaos Giant could be high grade. Chaos Giant is like right there because it requires one more than the minimum amount required. So it's like, you know, you're already going in for one when I go for another. But like the Ancient Gear cards like Hound already has a fusion effect attached to it. So we're adding an extra card by using Greater Polymerization. The card itself like barely minimally benefits from Greater Polymerization too. Because you already don't have to worry about spells and traps. And so it only covers monster effects that destroy, and even then we only have to carry about them not in the battle phase because our opponent can't activate monster effects during the battle phase with Chaos Ancient Gear Giant. In fact, Chaos Ancient Gear Giant, now that we talk about it, it might actually need to be lower on the list. Because there's so little that it actually does for the card. Like, Chaos Ancient Gear Giant might need to be like here. I think that about does it. So, this is the tier list. Vision Hero Trinity is the perfect card to summon off of Greater Polymerization. Huge attack stat, multi-attacker. It even plays around some of the weaknesses inherent to Trinity that were put there to balance it out. I can't think of a better card out of all of these that complement a card more than that. I think that Chimera, Neo Blue Eyes Ultimate, and Alba Lenatus also have some pretty good places on there, though of course Alba has the Branded Fusion to work with. Everything else here is varying shades of but now that I've had my piece, I want to hear yours. What do you think? What would you change on this ban list? Is there anything that I somehow missed after my eons of extensive research on which cards can be put on this list? And what card would you like to see put on a tier list like this in the future? I know there's a ton of wacky cards out there in the game, and I'd love to give them a chance to see how they clash against each other on the tier list. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the lovely people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar commanders Sir Knight JCB and the Critic of Innocence, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Anansi Dragon, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Emily Chan, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Mega Combi, Millennia Asta, Muzuki Clark, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Serenity Towns, Sky Buster Leo, That One Dumbass and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Alpha Sly, Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Berin Von Titty Sprinkles, Beluga Master, Blitzwolf, Blue Gem, Borger with a Shotgun, Callum McCann, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper RIP, Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Ignis Heat the True Draco Slayer, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Manga Pages, Marluxia's a Girl, Matt Simmons, Mick Spoofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Nitromo, Obsidian, Ramen Resurrect-chan, Shizuki Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, Terror Top to 3, the Legendary Raven and Zeldreka, as well as the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you checked out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member.